notes out and here we go. So first things first, Karl, let's assume that you have an interview coming up. I have an interview coming up. What's the main 2 or 3 things that I need to know or do before that interview?
Before I get into that, just to say, all of you, some of you I know is from Melbourne, like Tina, and the rest of Australia are both A, relieved that we're not in Melbourne or Victoria, and B, feeling for you. So if you're there, it's a tough time. I can't imagine what that must be like. Leading through this time has been incredibly difficult, but now it's just living through it as well. So if you're there and you're in that situation, we're praying for you, we're thinking about you, we trust that it goes well for you, or as well as it can. I think that one of the key things about an interview is that in a way it's a lot like a sermon. It's a piece of communication. That's what you're trying to do. So one of the first things you need to ask about an interview is, what's the point? And if you can't think of a good point, it might be a good reason not to do it. So that sounds really, really kind of a very standard, basic thing to say. But before you start any conversation, whether it's a live interview within the church service, or whether it's sometimes an interview even when before somebody's to speak, or whether you're recording an interview, ask yourself this: what is the point I'm trying to achieve? What do I want to get out of this? What's the point of doing this? We're not just filling time, we're not just wasting time. So research and ask the question, what are you trying to achieve? Now, there are you can actually achieve different things, because we often think about interviews as just like somebody's story, like a testimony, which is very true. But sometimes it's a good way to get information, and sometimes it's a good way to get expert knowledge. I remember doing a sermon once, and it was on, we were doing reproductive, like the ethics of reproductive health. You know, what's a Christian response to the ethics of reproductive health? Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly au fait with that. And all of us as preachers and teachers and pastors have to deal with subjects we don't know particularly well. So in the middle of the sermon, I actually got a guy who I knew was a specialist who works in IVF to come up on the platform. And all I was asking him is what is his experience and his expert knowledge of that particular area. Very contained interview, only about information, really. It really wasn't much about him other than saying what he did. But it was just a way of getting good information. So you can actually use an interview in that setting as well. Key question: what are you trying to achieve?
Good interviews, Karl, rely on good research. What does this look like for you, and what should we be looking for in that research phase?
Yeah, I mean, the research thing is really interesting, and praise God for Google. My goodness, like, you know, how do we ever preach before Google? And that's actually true about interviewing as well. So you're trying to, and if they've written, the trouble is when you're interviewing somebody that's written like 5 dense books, you know, you don't have time to read all of the books, but you do need to be across their material and their story a bit. One of the things that I try to look for is the thing that other people may not know about. I remember interviewing Karen Sawada. Some of you might know Karen. She ran the Deaconess Ministries here in Sydney. She's actually known as an academic. She has a doctorate in I think it's in ancient history, actually. So, and I was interviewing her on a particular panel. And when I was doing some background research, I discovered, wait for it, that she used to be a jockey. Like, it's the last thing that you would think of. And so in the middle of this academic kind of, you know, discussion about history, and that's where it was going. That was the point of the interview. But I said, so you used to be a jockey. And that was just such you're trying to kind of break it up. And one of the ways of making an interview interesting is to actually bring something out of left field that people aren't expecting. I mean, it's like, again, think about it like a communication skill, like preaching a sermon. If you just do the totally predictable thing of what people are expecting in the sermon, then it gets a little on the dull side. So in an interview, if you're trying to uncover something that people don't know, so that's what you're looking for in the research. The other thing about research, especially if you're interviewing somebody that's well known, say you've got a well-known person coming to your church, watch a couple of times that they've been interviewed. That just gives you some idea of how they function in an interview and how they'll respond. And again, there'll be some bits and pieces that you may not know. So try and find out, get across their body of work in the sense of not read everything, but know what they've been doing. Find something that's a bit different, get a bit under the radar, get some information that's a bit different, and try and pull those things out so that you're making sure that you're across that